alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. It is a great honor and pleasure to introduce Sister Randa Ubaid, who's a pediatric occupational therapist, so she deals with children, and my sister Fatima Hamo. She's a certified teacher, teaching high school currently, but has experience overseas teaching different ages. Both are very active here at Wellness and have a lot to offer for setting up our children for success. So without further ado, they can take over from here.
Thank you. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I know we're all still in summer mode, and it's hard to think about going back to school. So I appreciate that you're here. Inshallah, we're about 10 days away from school starting. So we figured it would be a good time for us to start thinking about just little tweaks that we can make, certain things that we can do that can help make those first 2 weeks back at school a lot smoother, inshallah. So we're happy that you're here, and inshallah, hopefully this information will be beneficial to you and your children. So whenever I start a talk like this, I always like to provide a framework, kind of like big ideas. And the reason for that is that you might not remember everything we talk about today, but if we have frameworks that we walk away with, then you can start to develop your own strategies for your own children that work better for them, because you're the expert on your kids. So I'll talk about a few big ideas, and then we'll get into more specific things. So Fatima and I were just talking about how there's this ideal parenting approach that we're going to be presenting today. Like basically what we know works best for kids based on science, based on like research, based on our own clinical experience, our teaching experience, being parents ourselves. So there's the ideal that we all try to strive towards, and then there's the ideal parenting plus realistic expectations, right? And just being real, being practical about all of this, because as you all know, we're not parenting in ideal circumstances. A lot of us are experiencing a lot of different pressures. Collectively, we're experiencing a lot of grief and sadness, and all of that adds a lot more pressure to us as parents. So applying these things consistently can become that much harder. So I'd just like to provide that kind of compassionate framework to begin with, that this won't always be easy to apply. It will be very hard sometimes. And as long as we're striving, like we see that bar, we're striving towards it, then it's okay if we're not always meeting it consistently. And we talked about just having that compassion for ourselves and for our children and for our fellow parents. Like we're all trying the best we can. So as you're listening to these tips, just keep that in mind, that it's not meant to stress parents out even more or make us feel like we're not doing enough. It's more of just, this is the bar that we're trying to reach, and here are some ways to get there. The other big idea that I like to talk about is understanding before we intervene. So as we're parenting our children and raising them, a lot of times they exhibit certain behaviors or symptoms. I call them sometimes a symptom, right? That behavior is just that superficial symptom that something deeper is going on. And that's where we just have to have that understanding of why are they doing that? Why are they struggling at school? Why are they not listening? And we're going to talk about those reasons today, inshallah. And then one of the other ones that we were just talking about is that it really does take a village, right? It takes a village to raise a child. And for a lot of us here, there is no village. We're pretty much doing it on our own as parents, right? Sometimes it's just a mom or just a dad or just the two parents that are already so exhausted from life, who are also at the same time, like we're not only growing older, we're growing up with our children. When you think about it, a lot of us in our 20s and 30s and 40s and beyond, we're still growing up, right? That we are still experiencing different life challenges every day and learning from them and growing up while we're trying to raise our children. So it's understandably going to be challenging. So just to keep that all in mind contextually as we go along, that it's okay if we're not meeting this 100% of the time, but we just strive for that. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
To the village comment.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes we hear from, the elderly, our parents, our grandparents, that, oh, it's not that hard.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody goes through it, but it really is harder now because of the fact that we don't have the village, that we are very much alone. We might have some friends, we might have some family, but 50, 100 years ago, they really did live more together, and they helped each other quite a bit more. And I think you'll find also that often people are having 1 or 2 children rather than 6, 7, 8 children, which is actually sometimes easier because the older ones help with the younger ones. So just being kind to yourself, recognizing feel alone. You might have that thought that you're by yourself. We're all going through the same things. We are together in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. We're all trying to figure it out as we go along. So alhamdulillah that we're able to come together and support each other with this. So having said that, and the title of this talk was How to Set Up Our Children for a Successful School Year. And I always like to define what we mean by successful. So for a lot of us, that idea of success means they have the highest grades, they're the top of their class, right? Which grades are important for sure. But I think there's a lot of other elements that make up a good school year that we should really try to hone in on. So the learning component, right? That especially Fatima can speak to this as a teacher, that we want our children to come out of the school year having actually learned. Like, it's not just that they got really good at answering questions on tests or that they memorized things, but that they actually developed a lot of inquiry, a lot of curiosity. Their knowledge repertoire expanded. Their social development, right? Have they been able to navigate friendships and difficult peer relationships better? Emotional regulation. Did they learn how to regulate those hard emotions throughout the year? Did they navigate hardships? Did they build some resilience? And did they build their self-confidence? Those are kind of the elements that I think about when I think about success in kids.
And I'll just add, as an educator, I always want students working to their true potential. So, you may have a student that has straight A's, and you may have a student that has C's. And the student that has C's is actually working more to their potential, possibly, than the A student. The A student may be able to do even better. And, oh yes, sorry. So the idea of working to the potential of the student in every way. So as I said, academically, athletically, emotionally, their self-confidence. We want them reaching their true potential rather than the top level that we can imagine or understand.
Yeah, exactly. So there are a lot of reasons why school can be overwhelming or challenging for children, and I think it's really important for us to identify these because, again, going back to that framework, we need to understand before we intervene. And Fatima and I spend a lot of time in schools, so sometimes I walk out of a classroom and I always make dua for teachers when I leave classrooms, and I really think they're some of the unsung heroes of our society, that there's so much going on in the classroom and there's so many different needs. Like, every child learns differently, and you're trying to teach the same curriculum to students that have very different lifestyles, a lot of baggage that each student brings into the classroom, different upbringings, different learning styles, and different needs. So when you're in a classroom environment, you start to see this, you realize school can be really overwhelming for students. So whether they have learning difficulties, right? And it makes sense. If you're having a hard time understanding what you're learning, it's going to be very hard to be at school. Sensory needs. So this could be a whole topic on its own, but for some students or some children, it's harder for them to filter out unnecessary sensory input. So for example, all of us sitting in this room, we're constantly receiving a lot of input through our hearing, through our vision, through our sense of touch, and all of that input is coming into our brain, and our brain is filtering out the stuff that isn't important. So for example, if there's like a fan on or there's someone talking in the hallway, our brains are able to filter that out and keep us focused on the most important thing in that moment. Some students have a really hard time with that. Like, they actually have a processing difficulty where all that input is entering their brain and they don't know what to pay attention to. And so it becomes so much harder for them to pay attention, right? So there could be that going on. They're highly sensitive, so this kind of ties into that, but there are temperaments, different temperaments that children have. Some of these kids absorb a lot more from their environment. They absorb the emotions and the states of those around them. They're a lot more empathetic, for sure, but it also exhausts them a lot more. You can imagine, if you're absorbing everything around you, it makes it harder to actually focus on what you're doing. There could be mental health concerns. Anxiety is a really big one, and we'll talk about anxiety later. Lack of belonging. I'm sure, with the research, there's so much research now in schools how a lack of feeling like you don't belong in your class or nobody likes you, that has a significant impact on learning. And obviously, we all want to belong. We all want to feel like we're wanted, right? So if a student isn't feeling that, it's going to be a lot harder to be in their classroom. Any kind of neurodivergence, so autism, ADHD, any kind of, basically, the way they function in their brain functions is just not the way that the world is set up, for them, right? So they experience a lot more challenges. Bullying and teasing, this is a huge problem in schools, and you can imagine if you're worried about being bullied at recess, there's no way you're going to be able to pay attention in class, right? Because that becomes the primary focus. And then one of the other reasons why school can be hard is having a difficult home environment. So our kids, when they come to school, they're bringing their home with them, right? And we call parents the invisible classmate. Kids are coming to school, bringing a lot of what's going on at home with them to school. And it's very hard for them if things have been really chaotic or unstable for them to experience that stability at school when they're in the classroom and they're trying to learn.
I'll just add to that as well, different learning styles. As an educator, you know, I taught to teach one way, and then we were taught to adapt and to adapt and to adapt as we learned about different learning styles. And now, you know, there might be like 7 or 8 different learning styles in a class, but I have to teach that content. So one student might not be able to understand me while I'm speaking. One student may not understand what I'm writing on the board. And so that's another thing to consider, that not all teachers differentiate their learning styles. So that's another thing that can be very challenging for students.
And so this slide, I know it's kind of hard to read, but I just want to quickly touch on executive functioning. So these are the skills that we all need every day to kind of get through our day and do the things we have to do, right? Things like working memory. Like if you put in your mind like 2 or 3 tasks you have to do, and you're able to hold on to those in your short-term memory, right? Like I have to go to the store, and I have to buy these things, and I have to go home and cook. So you're able to keep them in mind. For a lot of children, those executive functioning skills are still developing. So they are managed by part of our brain called the prefrontal cortex, and that doesn't develop till our mid-20s. So you can imagine a child who's 8 or 9 or 10 who's trying to get through their school day, and they need all of these skills, right? Flexible thinking, emotional control, impulse control, right? They really want to do something, but their brain, you know, has to tell them to stop doing it. Prioritizing tasks. If they have a test tomorrow, they instead go clean their room instead of studying, right? That's an executive functioning task, to know what the most important parts of my day are and to actually prioritize them. So when we think about these skills that we all need, how they don't develop fully, that part of the brain that manages them doesn't develop till our mid-20s, it helps us understand our children a little bit more developmentally, so that we start having more realistic like expectations of them and what we're asking of them. It doesn't mean we don't sometimes push a little bit and encourage them and give them a lot of practice, but it just helps us have that lens of understanding that, am I asking of you something that you're actually developmentally able to do, given your age and your development. So these are just things to keep in mind as we're going along. Anything for okay. So this brings us to the basics. So part of preparing our kids for school, or just throughout the year and any time in their life, is whenever a child is struggling in any way, I always say let's go back to the basics and make sure they're sound. So we're going to talk a little bit about sleep, nutrition, play, their routine, and their emotions. And once these things are in place, everything else starts to fall into place a bit easier. So that's why we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about them, inshallah. So sleep, I always explain, it's the glue that holds us together. Without sleep, everything, those executive functioning tasks I just talked about, are severely impacted. Our ability to handle stress goes down, right? Like I'm sure all of us have had times in our life where we weren't sleeping well, right? You had newborn babies, or we're going through like a crisis of some sort, or our sleep wasn't good. That has, as you can imagine, such a big impact on our ability to regulate emotions, our memory, right? You start forgetting things. Our ability to focus becomes a lot harder. And for children who, again, remember how their brain is still developing until their mid-20s, they're going through all these periods of rapid brain development where they need sleep. Sleep is actually the time where the brain develops the most. So it's the only time, it's the only time when we get out of our own way and our brain is able to actually consolidate all the learning. So if your child's at school all day, they've learned all this amazing stuff, and they go home and they're not sleeping well, their brain can't consolidate everything they've learned and store it into their long-term memory. Like it really affects their memory. Like when we're sleeping, that's the time where our brain kind of re-energizes and rejuvenates. So sleep is just, it's vital, and usually once we get their sleep well, like I said, everything else starts to get better.
It also affects their moods, obviously, as we all know,
Yeah.
for us as well. And with the teens, we find that actually studies show that they should be sleeping a little bit longer in the mornings. And unfortunately, we haven't accommodated schools to fit their physical needs. And so you have kids in the morning and they're very tired. They cannot process. They cannot think. They don't want anyone to speak to them. It's very real. And you probably see it at home as well at times. So just keeping that in mind, that actually their bodies want to sleep later and stay up later. That's biological. So just that's something to be considerate of for the older kids. Also, I think Nanda touched on the consistent bedtime, waking up regularly, even on weekends. Just again, as adults, when we have that routine, we function more optimally. The same goes for students. We find that kids that are in athletics, they use up energy, they do sleep better, and then they're more functional in the morning. Somehow, that routine, it becomes more balanced. And so having those consistent times of sleep is really better for their education. And these are things that we know. But also, the studies are showing with screens, switching off screens an hour before bedtime really calms down the brain and allows us to sleep better. It's hard for us to do as adults, but it's something that we should encourage. We should model, and it's something we should encourage for our children as well.
Yeah, for sure. And then in terms of like that consistent sleep time and wake up time, so now in the summer it's understandable, probably sleep is all over the place. So, and we're going to talk about some sleep ranges, like how much time kids need to sleep depending on their age. So now would be a good time, like now we're 10 days away from school starting, to gradually bring back their sleep. Like start 10 minutes at a time, because what happens is if children are used to sleeping at 10:30 or 11, and then it's the day before school we tell them go to sleep at 8, that's not going to happen. Like good luck, good luck with that. It's just not going to happen. So we have to gradually go back. So start just 10-15 minutes at a time. Again, it's so important. They might resist you at first, but then again, it's kind of just we're trying to set them up for the best possible functioning that they can have. And yeah, so just really trying to get that bedtime back, because, and I won't get too technical, but there's all these sleep cycles we go through, right? We have like our REM, like our rapid eye movement sleep, and then our non-REM sleep. And we need enough of those, because each cycle of sleep like achieves different things, different functions for our brain. One helps solidify memories, one helps solidify facts and things that we learned. Like they both have such an important function. And then if a child hasn't gotten enough of that active REM sleep, which is in the later half, and you try and wake them up in the morning, best of luck to you. I hope it goes okay, because they're probably going to be so tired and so groggy, and it's going to be really hard to wake them up. So so we'll get to the next slide here, which shows the ranges. And again, these are general. These are on average how much sleep children need to get. So a lot of the kids I see here are probably in that school age, like 5 to 13-year-old range. So they need between 9 to 11 hours. So if you think about what time they need to wake up, let's say it's at 7 o'clock to make it to school on time, then you count back, right, 9 or 10 hours. That's when they should be out. Like, not that we start the routine at that time, they should be completely out at that time. Because I just look at every half hour or hour that they're missing of sleep, it's like robbing them of an opportunity to function well the next day. And there's all these studies that show, like, even like I think a missed hour of sleep affects a child the next day in terms of grade level. And I think it was 3 grade levels. Like a grade 4 student will function at a grade 1 student level. So it can really, really impact them, especially for if they have a test the next day. I don't recommend all-nighters. I think that just, even the information they do know, they won't be able to recall it as well. So always prioritize sleep. And part of this, and I think we'll get to it in one of the other slides, but if they're doing extracurriculars or they're out and doing things, extracurriculars are important and they're beneficial, but if it's happening at the expense of their sleep and they're not getting home till 8 or 9 and they still have homework to do and they still want to have family time, and your child isn't sleeping till midnight, then we need to reevaluate how beneficial those extracurriculars actually are, because we don't want anything to be at the expense of their sleep. So again, we always want to prioritize that. One quick thing I'll mention, because there's all these different sleep disorders. One of the ones that I see the most is kind of that sleep disordered breathing, where children at night aren't breathing well, right? So the quality of their sleep isn't good. So if they're breathing through their mouths and they're snoring, that usually indicates their brain isn't getting enough oxygen. So we're supposed to only breathe through our noses. So if that's the case, if you notice your child's snoring, their mouth breathing, they will look visibly tired the next day. Like you'll be able to tell. They kind of seem congested. They seem like they have a runny nose all the time. That means they're just not breathing well. There's either their adenoids or tonsils are enlarged, or they've just learned to mouth breathe more. So I would definitely get that checked out by their doctor, because once we get their sleep and their quality of their sleep better and their breathing better, things usually get better. All right.
Nutrition.
Yeah.
Right. So after sleep, we want to ensure that kids are getting a good breakfast before coming to school. That's often difficult for some. We know as they get older, they tend to skip meals more frequently. But it's important to start the day with good protein, things that are not super sweet, not super sugary, not ultra processed, because again, we want things to last them throughout most of the day. It's really important that they're hydrated, that they're drinking lots of water, because again, that keeps them alert. Okay, so we see kids coming into school drinking, I do at least, see them with sodas in the morning or coffees or these sugary drinks. And that lasts, it's good for them for about an hour, and then they hit like this very bad low and they feel very tired. So the nutrition affects as well their sleep and vice versa. You've written a little bit about vitamins, which are obviously important.
Yeah, for sure. And just in terms of our diet, like we're just not getting enough from our food sources in terms of those essential vitamins and minerals. So just talking to your child's doctor about like zinc, the B vitamins, the omegas, magnesium can be really good before bedtime too. Iron, all these important minerals. So, and protein, as Fatma mentioned, is really key. So trying to add protein to each of their meals, sending them something for lunchtime that also has protein in it. Avoiding those sugary cereals, because like Fatma said, by 11 or 12, they're going to hit a crash. And just learning a little bit about gut health, about how we have that two-way communication system between our brain and our guts. And our guts are the place where serotonin is manufactured, right? That feel-good hormone. So if our children aren't getting enough, or if our children's guts are inflamed because of all the stuff that we're consuming, right? A lot of the foods we eat are highly processed, or they're very inflammatory, and that creates a condition inside of our gut where it can't produce these really good hormones that we need to function. So just being aware of those. Usually the 5 culprits are like sugar, dairy, gluten, soy, artificial flavors that are in a lot of their candies, right? And a lot of the things that our children eat. No judgment, like my kids eat this stuff too sometimes. So we just to be aware, like if your child's behavior, their mood, their routine is not going so well, just look at what they've been eating, and that can usually have a huge impact on them.
And I've just mentioned as well, for teens, obviously they're more independent, and you want to encourage that, but try to keep guiding them, reviewing what's important to eat, and maybe make suggestions in a non-threatening way. We do that at schools as well. We do have breakfast programs and breakfast clubs where we offer them, we offer them apples and oranges and cheeses and crackers and things that are hopefully helping them to sustain them throughout the day. But it's a little harder, I think, at the teen years, but just because they do want to, eat the junky food, they want to eat the fast food, and it's okay once in a while. Like we're obviously not saying don't ever do it. That's not realistic or practical, but just to encourage them to choose the healthy foods more frequently.
For sure. And something I always recommend is crunchy foods for their lunchtime and their snack times. Eating crunchy foods stimulates our proprioceptive system. That's why we eat chips and things like that when we're stressed. So just giving them something crunchy to have either on the way home from school, and we'll talk about after school routine, or during their lunch, like crackers, carrots, things that are crunchy can be really regulating to their nervous system, and it helps alert them. So just as a little life hack, little lunch hack there. So the third thing that we talk about, and whenever adults, we're giving these talks for like adults, like in terms of their well-being, we always talk about the 3 big ones: sleep, exercise and nutrition. So we talked about sleep and nutrition for kids. For exercise, it's usually the equivalent of play. So play is absolutely essential, right? It's like the primary occupation for a child. And sometimes it's like at the bottom of the list, although it's so, so crucial for their development, their social development and their emotional development. Play is where children learn a lot of life skills. They learn frustration tolerance. They learn what to do when a child takes their toy. They learn what to do when they feel left out and how to ask to be included. They learn all these very important social skills that they might not learn in other aspects of their life. And the other thing about play is it's the way they process their day. So for us, after a very long day, we come home. Each of us kind of has our own way of winding down. For children, it's playing. It's just letting them play with outside is obviously a lot better, but any type of play where they can just, and you'll see like their whole body relaxes when they're playing, and it uses the whole self. Like play uses everything. So I just always recommend that children have a time where it's like unstructured play after school, time to wind down, where they can just be, right? They can just be left and they can play, and they can, if they have siblings or friends, it really develops their creativity and imagination.
And I'll add the pre-adolescent, so let's say the grades 5 to grades 8, they spend a lot of time paper and pencil at school. It's more increased, less play. So it's especially important for them after school to have that downtime and that time to decompress and play. Again, outside is the best, physically is the best, but that there should be a break after school where they have time to just do that, because they spend a lot more time that's focused at their desks, and they don't get those opportunities as much. Again, depending on who their teacher is and what program they're in, they're often sitting down for a large portion of the day, at the end of the day especially.
And so now we'll talk about routine. I know we kind of touched on it with all the different categories we talked about, but having that predictable routine, right? Consistency. It's very good for the brain. It's very, very good for a child's brain, because it frees up their brain resources for other things. If they're not always concerned with when am I going to sleep, when are we going to have our meal times, when am I going to do my homework, they just know their routine, and they become a lot more independent. They come home from school and they kind of just know what to do. You don't have to keep telling them what to do. If your child's still struggling, you can always make like a visual routine. Like you just print out, you can do it on Canva or any kind of program, where you just list pictures even, like if they're really young, if they're really struggling with that can just help cue them what's coming up next. And that's where I kind of have that little spiel about extracurricular activities, how they're good. They teach a lot of great skills, and I do recommend them for sure. But we have to realize at what point are they becoming too much, right? Because too much of something good is still not a great thing. So you just have to look at your week. And I recommend actually every family just sit down and before school starts and look at your lifestyle, look at your week schedule. And we do this sometimes. And once you lay it all out, you're like, yeah, this is crazy. What are we doing here? Like, we're just out all the time. We're in the car. We're just driving our kids from one thing to the other, and everybody's exhausted. So we just have to think about, is this adding one more thing to our week? Is that going to be healthy for everyone or not? Is that going to impact their sleep, their homework, our ability as a family to just connect? So just being aware of how much you and your children are doing after school, and adjusting it as needed.
And I think as parents, there's a lot of pressure on us as well, especially these days. You know, every student is speaking like 3-4 languages. They're in 6 sports. They're playing 3 instruments. Like it's a lot. And so as a parent, you're like, I want them to do this, and I want them to do this, and I want them to do all these things. But the flip side is at school, we see a lot of children are exhausted. They do have the anxiety. So there are kids that have a lot of great routine, and it's wonderful. They know what they're going to do, but they are overwhelmed. And so, you know, that point about limiting the extracurricular where possible, like maybe have seasons, maybe do like this for a few months and then off, and then next thing for a few months and then off, to not overpack their schedules, because as important as routine is, it's also important to understand that we need to be flexible, and things might change. We might need to deviate. And I know I personally have had a problem with one of my children where, you know, we disrupted the routine, and he just, it was disastrous for him because he didn't know what to expect. But actually, that was actually a great learning experience for all of us to recognize that we need to know how to be flexible. And if things change, it's okay, no big deal.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. That there's going to be those seasons of life where we're, as a family, going through something a lot harder. So we just have to adjust, right? We have to keep tweaking things. And then our last part of the routine here is that screen time and devices. So that's a whole other spiel or rant. But in terms of screen time, so the way I look at it is devices are a tool, right? Screen time, use it as a tool. And just to be wise about when they're getting it. Because if your child has homework to do and they watch before they do their homework, it's going to be so much harder for their brain to actually sit down, like to allow them to do their homework. Because their brain's getting all this amazing dopamine with them doing almost nothing, like just sitting there and watching, or they're scrolling, or they're watching on their iPad, or playing a video game even. Their brain is getting so many hits of dopamine so easily versus, and then coming down from that level of dopamine and sitting down to do your math homework, it feels almost painful. Like it's very difficult to do that. So just have an arrangement where after you finish your homework, you get, and again, just try to make it limited. I'm not against screen time. I think there's uses for it for sure, but we just have to be smart about where we put it. And it makes it hard because you don't want it too close to bedtime, and you don't want it before they do their homework. So just trying to find ways that work for your family where you can add it in. So just always remember the dopamine part. That reward center in their brain is firing so much when they're on their screens. Nothing will compare to that. Like, you would usually need to do so much in your life or in your day to get that much dopamine. And when we're getting it, when we're just sitting down, the brain is always going to want to do more of that because it's the path of least resistance. It's so much easier. So just something to keep in mind with that. All right, and then regulating emotions. So another part of kind of just setting our children up for a good school year is just talking to them about, like, just making it more, like, easier for them to talk about their emotions at home, right? Just cultivating that safe, like, emotionally safe home environment where it's okay for you to express if you're sad, if you're angry, if you're disappointed. Children need to experience, like, that whole range of emotion to be able to learn how to deal with emotions, right? We can't learn how to deal with something that we're not allowed to have or we're not allowed to express. And I know it's hard. I know when we're already dealing with a lot as parents, it's very hard when your child's having a meltdown or if they're very upset about something. And the way I say is all feelings are okay, but all behaviors are not, right? So we allow the emotion. We try to understand the emotion, where it's coming from, and we help guide our child as to how to manage it. And we model that, like healthy coping, right? So proper sleep and nutrition, they basically help raise that whole threshold for our children. So if your child's very easy to get upset, their threshold is very low for tolerating stress, the way to actually raise that for them is to make sure they're sleeping well and eating enough protein, especially, and getting enough play. So that's just about the emotional aspect.
And I'll just add to this, depending on how old or young your children are, as they get older, they're praying regularly, and that can tie in to this as well, as teaching them that prayer can help to regulate their emotions. It's a pause in the day. It's downtime. It's that, reflection, meditation, however you want to put it, that can also help with regulating emotions. We even find in the schools that this is a tool that's used with all students, not just Muslim students, is that downtime, that break, the breathing, the meditation. So for us, alhamdulillah, we have the prayer 5 times a day. That can be incorporated into regulating emotions as well as they get older.
And I just find this helpful to do before school starts. So part of and there's going to be a lot of things that I recommend we have conversations with our children about. I think we sometimes not just forget to have these important conversations, but we're so busy doing so many things that it just doesn't become a priority. But I find sitting with our children and just helping them connect, like, why do we go to school? Like, just helping them understand, why are we doing this? It'll really help them on those days where motivation is very low. They don't understand why they're learning certain things in math or science or English class, and they don't know how this is ever going to be helpful. And we just help connect the dots for them, because it might be very hard for them to do that. And that just helps them, again, in terms of their learning, like just remembering that we're on this path of knowledge seeking throughout our life, and what our ultimate purpose is, right? And what we're here to do, what we're here as ambassadors, what we're here to do as servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. and how part of that, a big part of that is knowledge seeking and how we're going to use that to benefit our ummah one day. And for us to model that for our children, I always think to myself, like, if my children never see me holding a book and reading it, or they never see me going to a class or a halaqah, and I don't model that love of learning, it might be very hard for them to cultivate that as well, right? So modeling that for them, again, with connecting to their purpose, like Fatima was saying, like making sure that there's a spiritual connection throughout the week. We attend a halaqah together as a family. We do something at home together. We try to pray together at home. All of that, just connecting all the dots for them.
And we have a golden opportunity now before school starts to discuss this, discuss renewing the intention, and in understanding all of these things. So even a 3, 4, 5-year-old can discuss with you their intentions of going to school and what they'll get out of the year. So it could be very, very basic, and it can be more obviously detailed as they get older. But taking the time a few days before school starts, set some goals, renew your intention, tie it back to ilm and Islamic identity, etc. I think that's really beneficial in the next few days.
And one of the other things that would be really helpful to do throughout the school year with our children is cultivating that growth mindset. So a lot of kids that we see sometimes, if they think that their skills or their strengths are just fixed, like I'm just not good at math, I'm not good at writing, I'm not good at reading, and just helping them understand kind of the language we use with them. That just because something is hard for you now doesn't mean it will always be hard, right? Like this is something you're learning. And we're going to talk a little bit about frustration tolerance later, but it's about helping your child understand that they're going to be in this thing called the learning space for a long time, right? Until they get something, and that's okay. That tolerating being in that is actually how we cultivate frustration tolerance. So just helping them see that we don't all have to be good at everything. Some of us are going to be better at things than others, and that's okay too, right? Otherwise, we start to compare each other, and we start feeling really bad. But just to help them understand your strengths are not fixed. The way you write now is not the way you're always going to write. The way you do your public speaking now, your presentation skills, you're not stuck like that. You can actually grow. So just using that language with them is really helpful.
And also just the idea, I mean, I'm a math teacher, so everyone comes and tells me it's hard. But, you know, I tell them, I'm like, we can all do these hard things if we work at them. Little by little, bit by bit, baby steps, and we grow small bits every day. So that idea of just very micro increments of change, you know, that's helpful coming from a parent as well, because sometimes, you know, the parent just says, well, I want you to get straight A's. Well, if you're talking to a student that gets C's or D's, that straight A's is often, it appears unattainable. So just working up, you know, small little increments really is much more beneficial for the children.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we talked a little about routine earlier, but there's just some tips that can really help us have that good morning routines, because one of the things that I think is the hardest aspects of our school day is the morning, is getting everybody ready out the door to school on time, especially if, as a parent, you have to be somewhere too at a certain time. You can't take, you know, your kids just can't take their sweet time getting ready. So it becomes a lot more stressful, and everybody's anxiety starts to go through the roof. So there are things we can do to actually make it a lot smoother, which I highly recommend, because I'll see children, for example, at school, and you know, they'll tell you, like, I had a really hard morning, and it transfers onto their day, and it kind of has a very far-reaching and long-lasting impact on their day. And it's not to make us feel bad as parents, it's just to make us aware that the morning is already a time of high cortisol. Like, we're already feeling stressed as it is, so we try to do things to make it less stressful as we go about our day. So I always find it helpful to just figure out what the best time is to wake up, when you have to leave, and add an extra 5-10 minutes, like a buffer, because there will likely be someone that can't remember where something is, or there was a form you had to fill out, or if you, especially with little ones, because there's that pending separation. They know they're going to be away from you all day, so they start to stall. So they take a lot longer. They don't really listen when you tell them to go get ready. It's not because they're trying to make it harder. They're just feeling like that sense of dread that I don't want to leave my mom or dad for the day. So it's just understanding that you may have to spend a little bit more time helping everybody get ready. So just giving yourself time. Talking about the routine the night before, like just telling your children as you're putting them to sleep, so tomorrow morning, this is what we're going to do, just to help prime their brains for that. Putting reminders, checklists. A lot of our kids that are a little bit older, and we're trying to help them be more independent, to remember all the things they have to take to school, putting Post-its or checklists at their door for them to remember everything. Infusing connection whenever possible. So if you do have a child who's really struggling to get going, you tell them to get ready and you come back 10 minutes later and they're still playing in their room, just taking that moment. I know we're in that moment, your frustration has gone through the roof, but just take a moment and infuse connection if you can. Like, just get down to their level. It takes an extra minute. Help me understand what's going on. Like, why aren't you getting ready? Is there anything I can help you with? And they'll probably tell you what's going on. So it's just rushing. I find it just increases everyone's anxiety and everyone just starts to get really upset. And so I always think about a good day starts the night before. Like, lay out everything at the door and have your kids do this. Like, you don't have to do it as a parent. Just ask them, what are all the things you need to take to school tomorrow? And they'll get quicker and it'll be more natural as time goes on. Have a checklist, especially in the winter when our kids are wearing like 18 different things. Put them all by the door the night before, their shoes, because chances are in the morning someone's going to have lost a glove or a hat or a shoe. So just make sure everything's at the door the night before. Lunches, it helps significantly to make them the night before. You can have your kids help you if you want. But it just all starts the night before in terms of sleeping early, getting everything ready, and then you're good to go.
And I'll just add to that, it's really helpful for some children if they are involved in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are asking them, what do you need to do to get ready?
Yeah.
So they take an ownership and become more independent
Mm-hmm.
in, these morning steps, because if they say it, then they internalize it, and then they know they have to do it. Not all children will be able to do that, but that's definitely helpful. And we see from a teacher's perspective, we see those students as definitely as more independent because they're able to, do those things for themselves. And I'll just state that we're going to share this with everyone. So I see some of you taking pictures, so you will all have access to this whole presentation at the end. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll try to leave some time for questions at the end. So we touched on this as we went along, kind of that fostering independence that Fatima was just talking about, right? Helping them come up with solutions. You'll get so much more buy-in, and again, we're helping to develop those executive functioning skills of problem solving. What do we need to do to help make this smoother? So if you've had a week that was really terrible, and we relate to school, and everybody was feeling really upset and anxious, then on the weekend, let's do a problem solving session. Let's sit down, figure out why this week went so poorly. How can we make this next week go smoother? And ask your children for advice, for their tips, for their feedback. Another way to kind of foster that independence is scaffolding. So basically that's doing like the first part of the task, and then you withdraw your support, and then your child does the rest, right? Getting dressed is an example of that, making lunches, a project that they're working on for school. A lot of kids will need a little bit of extra help with that from their parents, but not to do the whole thing for them. Just start it, and then have them do the rest can be really helpful. Another part of this is just gradually widening that comfort zone for our children, right? Your child might have a comfort zone that's this big. We don't keep them there, though, right? We gradually start to increase it, and that's by giving them opportunities to practice that and letting them see that we believe that they're going to be able to do that. So they start believing it, acknowledging the discomfort that comes with trying new things or with being more independent. If they really still want you to help them with something, just letting them know, I'm here, but I know you can do it, right? I know you can do hard things. And then that gradually becomes their inner voice, and then they can start doing them. All right, and then, so we just have some strategies to help with that transition again. We're 10 days away, so we might need to do some of these things. I found this one really helpful the other day. I did it with my son, and we got out his report card, so it's been a few weeks since we went through it, since June. So we went through it again, and just the different comments that his teachers had made, we talked about it, and we kind of set some goals. So, okay, these are the things you did really well last year, so let's keep doing that. And here are some of the things that your teachers mentioned we could work on. And that just refreshes that all in their memory. So I'd recommend doing that with your child, talking about their goals, where they need to improve. This next one here, I find it really helpful too, is to just visit your child's school even from the outside. Go for a drive, go for a walk, especially for little ones, because I don't want my child, the first time they go back to school after 9 weeks, and they see their schools on their first day of school, because that will elicit a lot of those emotions inside of them and those butterflies in their stomach and that anxiety. I want them to have already experienced that before the first day of school, so it's not as big of a shock to their system. It's just like if you're away from work for like a whole month, and then you go back and you just don't feel well that first hour or so. So that might help if you have little ones too, just taking them for a drive, or if they have a playground that they can play with, letting them play outside. Discussing transitions, the transition back, what to expect. So talking to them about the routine, just saying, okay, school starts in 3 days. This is what we're going to be doing. Talking about kindness and compassion towards their classmates, right? So this is again, because of how much teasing and bullying happens in schools. I always think if we had more of these conversations at home, where we explicitly talk about kindness and appropriate and inappropriate behaviors, how perhaps that incidence would go down. So just something to talk about with our children and kind of what they can expect in terms of that.
Just a note about like avoiding the comparisons. If you have more than one child, you already know this, that not every child is the same. And one might be very excited to go back to school, and the other one may be very anxious. So sometimes we neglect that idea and just brush over it. But even as an educator, like when I have 30 students, I'm not always necessarily focused on every individual child, but I remind myself that some are coming to the table with different tools than others. So it's important to understand that some might transition very easily and some might take a few days or even weeks.
Yeah, for sure. And that avoiding comparing your child to other children or to their siblings, it's kind of one of the big like parenting no-nos for so many reasons. It's just, I never see it panning out well, ever. And what happens between siblings, like for example, saying like, I wish you were, as organized as your sister, or wish you were, as like you study as well as your brother, or whatever it is, they will likely continue to feel that into adulthood, right? And I see it all the time, where they keep feeling these, I'm never going to be as good enough as my brother or my sister. And that doesn't do good things for their relationship. It actually just develops resentment sometimes, and it just doesn't do good things for their self-esteem. So there's much better ways to motivate a child to do good behavior that don't involve comparing, that don't involve shaming. So just to keep that in mind as we're transitioning them back to school. And then school-related anxiety. So as we talked about, anxiety is probably the most prominent mental health concern that I see in schools with children. It could be due to a variety of reasons, right? There's so many reasons that we won't be able to cover today. But the thing that I find helps children a lot with anxiety is understanding its purpose. So when we explain to children, why do we get anxious? Like, what's the function of it? Anxiety comes to protect us, right, from some outcome, from some negative outcome. It comes to tell us that there's something important coming that we need to prepare for, like a test or a presentation. So it has a very adaptive purpose. Like, we need to feel anxious in order to function, right, in order to protect ourselves from things, right? It's only when anxiety becomes unhealthy that we start avoiding things. We start not wanting to do certain things because of how anxious we're feeling, because our bodies and our brains are getting this threat signal that something bad is happening when it might not actually be that bad. So it's helping our children understand that. I find it really, really helps them. Talking about ways to cope with that anxiety, right? Modeling that to them. Deep breaths, right? Going for a walk. Movement is actually one of the best ways to lower our anxiety. So just to remember that it can impact them in so many different ways at school. It can impact their attention, their social skills, and just to validate for them. Like, I know you're feeling anxious, and you can still do the thing you're anxious about doing, and it probably won't be as bad as you're thinking it is, right? So just to encourage them not to avoid the things you're anxious about, because they're just going to increase that anxiety.
And oftentimes in schools, some anxiety is not bad, as you mentioned, when it comes to writing a test or running a race or a competition, that anxiety is what gets you going. And so I tell my students a little bit is healthy, because I get students coming and saying, well, I can't write the test today because I'm anxious. And and I tell them a little bit's good. If it's debilitating, then yeah, we need to pause. But you need to kind of explain and talk to them about that. A little bit's okay, a little bit's natural, it's normal. And if it's excessive or debilitating, then we have to work through it, or potentially speak to a professional.
Yeah.
But I love this. Kids do well if they can, and I believe this fully. If they're there and they can do it, then they will. And if there's something stopping them from doing so, then we need to be aware and we need to address that.
Yeah, and I always like reminding them that your track record of getting through hard things is 100%, right? You've gotten through all the hard things in your life, and you're still here, and you're still, doing what you need to do. So if this thing that you're about to do, whether it's basketball tryouts or a test or anything that they're about to do, if it seems really hard, just remember all the other hard things that you've done, right? Helping them connect those dots, because their children won't always remember. And so, like I said, just try not to let them avoid the things they're anxious about, because it increases that for sure. Yeah.
I'll just say one more thing about anxiety related to school, and then the track record of 100%. There's the idea of failure. And you'd be surprised how many students actually verbalize being afraid of failure. You know, when I was in school, if we asked a student, what are you afraid of? We would have said spiders, heights, a well, a deep well, quicksand, like crazy things. Never would anybody say they're afraid of failure. It wasn't something that we could even verbalize. When I ask my students now what they're afraid of, 7 out of 30 will say failure. And I always talk to them about failure and how failure can actually be a gift. And I talk about toddlers and learning to walk. If you don't fall, you'll never learn how to walk. And falling is failure for walking, right? So we don't want children to fail badly. But little falls along the way is how we learn and is how we grow. And so when they're anxious about failure as a parent, you have to try to comfort them as much as possible and ensure that if they do have those little micro fails, it's okay, because they'll get to success eventually, inshallah.
Yeah, very good point. That building resilience, right? Allowing them to have experienced a little bit of that hardship. So separation anxiety, this is more for the really little ones that are starting kindergarten or just new to school. We talked about a few of these strategies, so I'll just hone in on one of them, which is when you're dropping them off, to focus on the next point of connection. So instead of just saying, okay, I'll see you later, so now focusing on when you're going to see them next and what you'll be doing. So saying, I can't wait to see you after school, and I can't wait for us to get home and work on this puzzle together. So you're really trying to build in their mind the next point they're going to be able to connect with you, and leave them with that. It can be really, really helpful. If there's anything in your front. This is a really helpful concept. So I know we probably don't have too much time to get into it, and if you've heard me talk before, you've probably heard me talk about the cup, the frustration cup. I just find it to be a very helpful visual for us to carry through our day as we interact with our children, and it helps us for ourselves. Like, I use this myself as a mother. Like, it's just really helpful. So as we go about our day, we all have like this figurative cup inside of us that fills up, right, with frustration and stressors. And some of us wake up and our cup is already half full because we didn't sleep well, and we wake up to the news and it's horrific things happening all over the world. So your cup is like half full, and then just give it an hour and your cup is probably going to start to overflow. And what happens when our cup overflows? That's when we, snap. That's when we have a meltdown. So as your child is going through their day, they are experiencing a series of frustrations and stressors that are filling their cup. And this is helpful for us to know, because if I'm about to ask my child to do something, and I can tell that they have a full cup, like they just came from school, their cup is probably, like I would say most kids probably come home and their frustration cup is full, because a lot of them, they bottle up all their emotions, and then they release them at home where it feels safest. So just to be mindful of that. Doesn't mean we don't ask our kids to do things, and we have to. But just be aware that they might need to empty that cup before they're ready to do their homework, or before they're ready to listen or do their chores or whatever it is. And there's a lot of different ways to empty out that cup, right? Again, movement, play is one of the best. Taking those deep breaths, having a snack, a nap, connection time, all of these things start to lower that cup. So it's a helpful analogy to visualize. And what complicates it even more is that each child will have a different size cup. So some kids will have a very small cup, so they actually can't take in a lot of stressors before they have a really hard time emotionally. And some have a larger cup where they can take on a lot more in their day before they need to start emptying it out. And as parents, this is also very helpful for you to know how full your cup is, because if you're going through your day and it's full, all it will take is just a very small little thing that your child does, and then we fly off the handle. So just to keep that in mind, I just find it a helpful visual.
And again, for those students, that are a little bit older, they've already had a very, very full day without a lot of time for play, without a lot of time to have that downtime. And so when they come to you at the end of the day, you as a parent, I know for me, I want to know what my kids did. I want to ask them about, like, how did they do on this test? What did they do in this subject? Like, I have to restrain myself because I know that they've already had a full day. They need some downtime before they can talk about it or discuss what they've done. So be mindful of that. I think it's a great analogy.
We'll just quickly kind of touch on advocating for your child at school, right? And I think Fatima can speak to this as a teacher, just how to have that conversation with your child's teacher.
Yeah, it's great to connect with your child's teacher, if not on that first day, through an email. I believe we have some resources, inshallah, through the educators and the parent group, where you can send a letter, a form letter, explaining maybe about certain things that you'd like done for your child. There may be specific things, but essentially connecting with the teacher very early on. Don't wait till parent-teacher night.
Yeah.
Do it early on through email or a little chat after school, just so they know that you're invested and they know that you're there. They put a face to the parent to the student, and ask what things are put in place to help with your child. And you can also advise as well. Okay. It's so much easier to teach a child when I know what the parent expects and what the parent wants. It's always more helpful to have the two-way, communication as well, rather than me just sending an email or leaving a voice note. So get in touch early, and if you need support and resources, we can definitely give those to you as well in terms of form letters.
And we'll touch on this as well because it's hard to talk about anything involving children without talking about those who are caring for those children, right? Caring for the caregiver. So I talked about the frustration cup for us parents. We need to just be in sync with how full it is and how we're doing. I find this next one really helpful, which is to try to be up before our children. It's really hard, I know sometimes, but I just find when we're waking up at the same time as our kids, it just makes it a lot harder, I think, for everybody to get ready in the morning smoothly. And then just something that I find really helps me with my children is how I respond to my children usually has a lot more to do with how I'm feeling than what they're doing. So by that I mean your kid could do the exact same behavior on 2 different days, and how you respond to them will be very different depending on how you're feeling, right? So just to keep that in mind, that when you take care of yourself, your children reap the benefits of that. They might even reap them even more than you, because having a parent who's grounded, who's taking care of themselves in a way that's consistently sustainable, right? Like doesn't mean we go on hours long and spend time alone without our kids, but this might just be your walk. You have your walk every day, half hour. You have your time where you sit and you read something, you journal, you go to your own class, your own halaqah. You have something that your children actually see you taking care of yourself, and this is so important. I think a lot of us, we grew up and because a lot of our parents were in survival mode, right? A lot of our parents were raised in very, very difficult circumstances where that wasn't an option, right? So it might be very hard for us to have a reference point of what that even looks like. Like, what does it look like for a parent to take care of themselves? But we have the opportunity to model that, right? That when I take care of myself, I'm actually able to pour back into everybody in a much healthier way. So just something to keep in mind. And after school restraint collapse, I kind of touched upon this. So what this is your child, you pick them up from school, they come off the bus, you say salam, you say hello, and then they come in the house and they fall apart. They kind of just break down. And there's a lot of kids that experience this, by the way, and it's because they've bottled it all up at school, because it's not really safe to let out all your emotions all the time at school, right? People, they don't want to be embarrassed. Their peers will make fun of them. So they keep it all in, and what happens to something that keeps being suppressed, it eventually has to come out. So they do that at home with their caregivers, who they feel the safest with. So it just really helps to have kind of that calming wind down routine. That's why it's so important not to have, I find, activities right after school. If they do have something to try, if you're able to kind of control that, like to plan it later on, like give them at least an hour. They can come home, they can have some quiet time, a snack. Again, those crunchy snacks will be really helpful. Just have like a box of crackers or something in your car. You can give them something on the drive home. So make sure they eat something, they're hydrated, and that they have some connection with you. They might not be ready to answer your questions about their day, so I actually wouldn't ask them right after school, how was your day? You're not going to get much. You might get a very mumbled good, if that. So I would just leave the questions later till they've kind of settled. But just to keep that in mind, if your child's doing this, that means they are so overwhelmed. They had a really long day, and they need some quiet time or downtime. And then this kind of ties into that, connecting with our children after school. So obviously, this goes back to that framework that I talked about, right? That we try to do the best we can. This might not happen every day, but it's looking at your child as, I know I talked about the frustration cup. They have another cup. It's the connection cup or the love cup. And we have to make these deposits into that cup every day. And it could be very simple things that you do, right? Like just hugging them when you're walking by them in the house. I'll never forget, I was once working with a child a few years ago. He was like in that tween age, like 10 or 11 years old. And he was brought in because there was just a lot of relationship issues between him and his parents, a lot of dynamic problems. So I asked him, what's one thing you would like me to share with your parents that they could do that would kind of help with this relationship? And he said, I just want them to come and sit beside me one day and ask me what I'm doing. Like, just ask me what I'm up to. And it sounded so simple, but yet so profound, that he just wanted someone at home to just notice him, like to just see him as this whole human being that has interests, and that his parents took interest in that. So it's just a very simple thing, and honestly, like, it's never to vilify the parents, right? It's having compassion for the whole family. And he told me, like, I see my parents running around trying to take care of me. Like, that's noticeable, and there's a lot of stress with that. So we sometimes miss these very simple yet very, very essential, crucial elements of having that relationship. And I always say the relationship we have with our kids is that connection capital. It's the thing, it's the place where all other parenting strategies stem from. So building that positive relationship with our kids is really the priority. And part of that is just a few minutes a day. Just sit with them and say, what are you drawing? Like, what are you building? What books are you reading these days, or what's going on? Can really, really go a long way.
And just again, from the education perspective, we sometimes hear kids telling us things that sometimes I think, okay, the parent should know this, or they should be talking to the parent about this. But I'm just as guilty of that as a parent, where, you know, I'm so busy trying to get everything done, and I want to get them to this place and to that activity, and that sometimes we don't take that pause and just connect. And you'll find that when you do that more frequently, then they do share things with you. And we made a note here about sometimes they share, you know, difficult things to hear. And we have to really control how we react. Because the fact that they're speaking to you and being open and sharing is very precious these days, especially with the state of the world. We're also preoccupied with what's going on. Sometimes we don't take those moments, but having that time and that connection is really, really valuable, and it builds the bond, which really does translate into a better human, a better student, a better athlete, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, for sure. And it's that sense of like they're a whole human being who, you know, it's that inherent need to feel seen, right, and heard in your home. That it's not just a transactional relationship where, as parents, and I'm right there with you, where all day long we're just telling them what to do or what not to do, because there's so much to get done, right? It's hard to just slow down and think to myself, oh, I haven't even asked my child how they're doing, or what happened last week when their friends did this, or I never followed up on that, I don't know what's going on in their life. And if we don't start that from an early age, like where we set that foundation, it's never too late. So if your kids are older, you could still do this for sure, just to have that hope. But it helps to establish that foundation of open communication, that you can tell me anything. And like Fatma said, we try to stay composed. You can freak out inside, but just try to stay composed. And then letting them know, like, I'm glad you shared that with me. Like, thank you for telling me. Like, that's important that you shared that. And just little bouts of connection. It could be while you're out on a walk together. Like, just having that time where they feel like home is safe. Home is a place of refuge for me, not a place where I have to seek refuge from.
And as Linda said, like, I really stress that it's never too late.
Yeah.
Like, We sometimes beat ourselves up as parents, like I should have done this and I should have done that. It's never too late. Be kind to yourselves because it is hard being a parent today. It's very difficult. We have so many things to navigate in this crazy world. So be kind to yourselves and do recognize it's never too late because you can connect at any age with your children.
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually one of the framework things that I missed, the repair after rupture, right? Where when a rupture does happen or when we've had a period of disconnection for a while, it's never too late to go back and repair and just say, you know what, I don't think I handled that properly. Narrate what happened, kind of like a story, like you asked me for this and I said no, and then we got upset and we started yelling or whatever it was. But to go back and repair, that teaches kids so many good things, teaches them to take accountability, that even a person in authority, which is their parent, probably the most important authority figure for them in their life at this time, is able to own up to their actions and take responsibility for them, right? And we still hold our children accountable. It's not like they get off the hook all the time, but we show them that even in my position as your parent, I can acknowledge when I've made a mistake, right? So and to just reestablish, I call it the interpersonal bridge, that like I'm here, my child is here, and I'm always trying to build that relationship bridge to get them to come back to me whenever they need me, instead of them thinking, I need to hide this from my mom. I want them to say, I need to go tell my mom, like right away. So just something to touch on, and then stress management.
We've touched on most of these already, but there are obviously healthy limits and healthy outlets. So we talked about sports rather, play, quiet time, downtime, limiting the overscheduling. We want to make sure that children all do have a little bit of downtime, and we're fortunate in our religion that we have 5 times a day for that. But if we can really encourage those pauses, it's really helpful. Modeling the positive coping. So, we are all stressed right now. We all are all overspent, but not constantly complaining about that. I have people that I work with that are constantly complaining, and the students get wind of it. They're just like, oh, that teacher again. So it's the same with parenting, right? Some of it's natural, and sometimes kids do need to know when you are stressed. So you don't want to hide everything, but we don't want to overly complain because we're modeling at the end of the day. Again, we talked about the exercise, healthy food, sleeping, etc., and mistakes equals learning opportunities. That's key, I think, to keep in mind.
And then I always like to keep this as one of kind of the final parts of the presentation, because I'm hoping that this really sticks. So we have, alhamdulillah, the most wonderful model, an example of how to interact with children and people in general, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he, subhanAllah, his brilliance, he understood this need that people have, and children for sure, to feel seen and heard and loved. And he catered to that. It was something that was just natural for him to be able to see where someone was at, and tend to them and tend to their emotional needs. And he embodied all these traits, right? Compassionate and very present, like how whenever he would be talking to someone, they would feel like they were the most important person to him, right? Curious, kind, firm, and patient. He just found a way to embody all of these traits. So I always think, subhanAllah, how that he modeled to us self-restraint. He modeled to us how to control and that frustration tolerance and our anger. So subhanAllah, that's that ideal, right, that we were talking about, that we strive towards. SubhanAllah, he modeled it so perfectly for us, and he made it look very easy, but it is really hard to do, for sure. And how SubhanAllah, his influence, in terms of what he was able to accomplish, a lot of that, I think, was based on his ability. He was such a people person, right? He was just able to understand the person in front of him and to just cultivate that positive relationship, right? So it goes back to that relationship I talked about with our kids, that it's very hard to parent someone and influence them positively if there isn't a good relationship there. And he spent time cultivating this with the people around him, and his character and spoke volumes. So, and the other piece is he modeled the correct way of living, which I think as parents is something that we try to always do, right? To model to our children, being on a path of knowledge seeking throughout our life, taking care of our bodies, taking care of our spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, prioritizing prayers in our day, right? If my children see that I plan my day around my prayers and I really prioritize this connection, that will inshallah become, I'm hoping, their path too. So just leaving us with that prophetic model of interacting with children, how he was so attuned to the needs of those around him. And then lastly, I think lastly, just kind of what we've touched upon, that when we fulfill our children's needs for connection, it frees up space in their brain for learning. So when our children feel connected and they feel safe, the learning centers in their brain turn on. When they're feeling anxious, when they're feeling disconnected, when they're feeling like home is going to be really chaotic when I go back after school today, that doesn't free up their brain for learning, because that's the primary thing their brain's going to think about. The stress, the things that are going to be happening at home, the conflict at home, how they might get in trouble when they get home for something, versus a child that feels connected and safe and loved and seen. It actually helps prime their brain for better learning. So, subhanAllah, just our takeaways here. We won't always get it right. That's okay. Just self-compassion, pick ourselves up and get back on track into that ideal that we're reaching for. Modeling is really one of the best ways to teach children. They'll learn so much more from what we do than what we say. Letting our children find, like I was saying, a place of refuge and safety, and seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, we don't always talk about this, but just the importance of making dua for our children. So making like that really heartfelt dua for them before they go to school, of blessing them with good teachers and good classmates and good friends, and making them good classmates to others and good friends to others and good students to their teachers. So keeping them in our dua and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen us to raise them in the way that's the most pleasing to Him. Any other takeaways? So I apologize that we only have 4 minutes for questions. That's my fault. So we can probably take a question. Yes, here we go.
So just for those of you that do want the presentation, if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to a PDF document. It will also be sent on the WhatsApp groups through Muslim Wellness Network. So we'll send the presentation, but if you do, I hope it'll work. Yeah. It should take you right to the presentation, and that's PDF, and it's yours to save, to share. Please share with others. Mm-hmm. And hopefully this has been beneficial in some ways. Does anyone have any questions at all?
Thank you. Yes. الله يعافيك يا رب.
هاي للpresentation. Yeah.
إذا بتحبي بعطيكي رقمي وفيك تتواصلي معي. بعطيكي.
Translated to Arabic.
Sure.
Yeah. إذا بتحبي ممكن ترجمها للعربي. Yes.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
لا معك حق.
I'll work on that this week.
أكيد لا معك حق. إن شاء الله الله يعافيكي. الله يعافيك.
Inshallah, we'll have this translated within, let's say, a week, inshallah, before school starts. Mm-hmm. Inshallah, we'll have it sent to you. Inshallah.
Allah يعافيك يا رب. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And this is like in this stage making a lot of internal problems inside her, and I just wondering what's the right way that I build this confidence inside her so that this type of bullying do not affect her in a way that it will affect her later on in her life. If you have any strategies or something that you advise us to.
Yeah, I'll quickly mention, I know it's Maghrib in about a minute or so. I'll just quickly mention, I would definitely get in touch with the school Is it happening at school or like in their neighborhood?
Sorry, to this point, there's an anonymous bullying hotline
Mm.
TVSB has. So
Yeah.
anonymous that
Yeah.
it won't connect your child to, like you can tell,
Yeah.
Is
no,
it with the
that's
public
helpful.
public schools board?
Yeah, it's public school. But I know that there's a hotline in USB stuff.
Mhm.
I just want her that she can deal with this stuff even if having like
Yeah.
formal way or not in like hidden way, you know? I
Yeah.
just want to know
She
this
wants to build
strength
her.
inside
Her
her.
confidence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I'll come and chat to you, inshallah, about that. Inshallah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, everyone, for coming.